Her wrench slipped, knuckles cracking against cold steel. Glue, hard, silver, unforgiving, sealed her toolbox shut like a coffin, the one she'd carried through 2 deployments, the one that had saved lives. Problem, Santis? Morrison's voice cut through the hangar like a blade, mock concern dripping off every syllable. The others circled, grinning like jackals. She didn't answer. Couldn't, not when her eyes caught the glint of adhesive under the pre-dawn lights and her gut told her the truth. This wasn't a prank. It was a warning. They thought she'd fold. They didn't know she'd seen what they missed, cracks in tail rotors that could kill Marines. Hydraulic leaks timed to fail mid-flight, small things dismissed as paranoia. But small things she knew became catastrophic at altitude. What she didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that the real threat wasn't the ridicule, the isolation, or the sabotage she could see. It was the traitor already inside the wire, counting on her to be ignored. Somewhere in this hangar was the person who'd decide whether 47 Marines lived or died by sunrise. Maria wiped the grease from her palms, looked Morrison dead in the eye, and said the words that would echo through the unit for years. "You can call me dead weight, but when this bird goes down, remember who tried to keep it in the air." The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 05:30 hours on a Tuesday morning. Staff Sergeant Maria Santis stood frozen in the pre-dawn darkness of the maintenance hangar at Forward Operating Base Coast, staring down at her toolbox. Every drawer, every compartment was sealed shut with hardened streaks of silver glue. Whoever had done it hadn't been sloppy. Each seam was fused tight, deliberate, impossible to pry open without destroying the box itself. This wasn't just any toolbox. It was the same custom kit she'd carried through 2 previous deployments. The same one she had organized like a surgeon's tray, every wrench, gauge, and instrument in its precise place. These were the tools that had saved helicopters others swore were beyond repair. And now someone had turned them into a useless block of metal. "Problem, Santis?" The voice came from across the hangar. Sergeant First Class Jake Morrison, his tone dripping with false concern. He stepped out from behind a Black Hawk's tail rotor, wiping grease from his hands in deliberate, slow strokes. The other mechanics, Corporal Davis, Staff Sergeant Williams, and Private First Class Chun, drifted closer, drawn by the scent of trouble like vultures to a carcass. "Someone tampered with my equipment," Maria said, keeping her voice level. Morrison crouched down, examining the glue with exaggerated interest. He dragged a finger across the hardened streaks. "Looks like you might have spilled something. Happens when you're not used to real field conditions." His mouth curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Maybe you should requisition some basic tools from supply. Like the rest of us started with." The jab hit its mark. She'd earned her advanced tool certification at the very top of her class, had rebuilt transmissions seasoned mechanics had sworn were scrap. But here, in this testosterone-saturated hangar, the only woman among 37 aviation specialists, none of that mattered. She spent the next hour working with borrowed tools, running through routine checks on Black Hawk 742, hydraulic fluid levels, rotor assembly inspections. Every movement felt watched. Every decision, second-guessed. When she spotted a hairline crack in the tail rotor hub, a flaw missed in the last inspection, she called Morrison over. He didn't even look closely. "Within acceptable parameters," he said flatly, eyes still on his clipboard. "You're seeing problems that aren't there. Rookie mistake. Overthinking gets birds grounded. Grounded birds get Marines killed." But Maria knew better. Under stress, the crack would grow, and when it did, the tail rotor could fail mid-flight. Catastrophic. She filed the report anyway, fully aware it would vanish into the bureaucratic void like the others before it. Over the following weeks, the harassment sharpened. Replacement parts she ordered arrived broken, or didn't arrive at all. Maintenance logs she'd completed disappeared from the system. In briefings, Morrison would cut her off mid-sentence, redirecting her points to male colleagues who would echo her suggestions word for word and get the credit. During one particularly humiliating meeting, Morrison announced, "Santis thinks we should replace the hydraulic lines on Bird 6. What do you think, Williams? You've got actual combat experience." Williams, half her training, twice her freedom from scrutiny, would agree with her, earning praise she'd never receive. The pattern was so predictable. Maria started timing it, 37 seconds on average, between Morrison dismissing her and accepting the same idea from someone else. The breaking point came on a blistering Thursday evening. She arrived for the night shift and froze. Beneath Black Hawk 742, a slick, shimmering pool spread across the hangar floor. Hydraulic fluid. Her mind snapped into overdrive. This wasn't a leak. It had been drained. She knelt, tracing the line of fluid back to its source. The reservoir was almost empty. The drain plug had been loosened, just enough to create a slow leak timed to empty before morning. Whoever had done it knew exactly how the system worked. They knew how much fluid could be lost without triggering alarms. Within minutes of takeoff, the aircraft would have lost control authority, spinning into an unrecoverable spiral. She called for Morrison. He showed up 20 minutes later, Davis and Chun in tow. Under the harsh fluorescent light, she laid it all out. The plug, the pattern of fluid, the deliberate precision. "You're being paranoid," Morrison said, giving the evidence a lazy glance. "Hydraulic systems leak. It's normal wear and tear." "This isn't normal," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. Someone what?" He stepped closer, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think one of us is trying to kill Marines? You calling us saboteurs?" The air went still. Davis and Chun's expressions hardened, curiosity turning into something colder. Maria realized she'd just crossed an invisible line. "I'm saying someone tampered with this aircraft," she said carefully. "Whether it's sabotage or negligence, 12 Marines could die tomorrow if—" "What we're not going to do," Morrison cut in, turning away from her, "is ground a perfectly good bird because our newest mechanic's seeing ghosts." He addressed Davis and Chun like she wasn't even there. "This is what I've been talking about. Dead weight, looking for excuses, pointing fingers to hide incompetence. Dead weight." The words hit harder than she expected. She heard them again later, whispered in corridors, murmured in mess halls, muttered during shift changes. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at the faint stains of hydraulic fluid still darkening her fingernails. Somewhere in the darkness, she knew someone was planning the next move in a deadly game she had only just begun to understand. At 4:45 hours, the alarm shattered the fragile quiet. Emergency resupply. Outpost Bravo had taken heavy casualties. They needed medical evacuation and ammunition. Maria ran for the flight line, her stomach twisting in dread. Urgent missions like this were when mistakes killed, when urgency crushed safety. Black Hawk 742 waited on the tarmac, its rotors gleaming in the first pale light of day. Silent, coiled, dangerous. Under the glare of the floodlights, Maria moved with deliberate precision, beginning her pre-flight inspection as she always did, methodically, with her hands gliding over each hydraulic line, her eyes scanning gauges, her fingers testing fluid levels. The hum of the tarmac faded into the background as her world narrowed to the machine in front of her. Everything seemed routine until she crouched beside the main landing gear. That's when she saw them, tiny specks glinting in the harsh white light. At first glance, they might have been nothing, just stray glitter-like flecks scattered near the hydraulic coupling. But the moment her eyes locked onto them, the blood in her veins went cold. They were metal shavings, fresh ones, sharp-edged, still bright from the cut. Evidence of filing or grinding, something no normal maintenance would produce here. Whoever left them had been working recently, and not for repair. This was deliberate. She traced the hydraulic line with her flashlight, the beam catching more of the same shavings near another coupling. And there, clear signs of tampering, faint but undeniable to someone who knew what to look for. One name surfaced in her mind like a bad taste. Santos? Santis! The barked voice carried across the tarmac like a gunshot. Marson, she looked up. His tone was all impatience. "What's the holdup? We've got Marines bleeding out." Maria rose slowly, her mind working faster than her body. The sabotage wasn't crude. It was designed for delayed failure. Once airborne, hydraulic pressure would strain the weakened parts until they gave way. She could see it in her head like a nightmare on replay. Liftoff would be smooth, climb steady, until catastrophic failure struck over hostile ground. No safe landing, no survivors. "I need to inspect the hydraulic system further," she called back, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Marson stormed toward her, his face red, the smell of jet fuel and sweat thick between them. "We don't have time for your paranoid inspections," he snapped. "Outpost Bravo is under siege." "Sir," she said firmly, "I found evidence of tampering." "Evidence?" His laugh was sharp and cutting. "You found some metal shavings near a helicopter." "That's called normal, Santis." His eyes narrowed. "Maybe if you spent less time chasing conspiracies and more time learning how aircraft actually work." "Someone filed through this coupling," she cut in, pointing to the suspicious spot. "Look at the pattern. Look at the scratches. Fresh in the same direction. This isn't wear and tear. It's sabotage." Captain Rodriguez, the mission commander, appeared at the edge of the scene, his impatience radiating. "What's the problem here?" Marson stepped forward like a shield. "Santis is trying to ground the bird again, sir. Says she found sabotage." The word dripped with skepticism. Maria felt the invisible weight of 47 lives drop onto her shoulders. Those Marines at Bravo needed to be airlifted now, but sending this bird as it was would be sending them to their deaths. "Captain," she said, forcing her voice to stay even, "I request permission for a full hydraulic system inspection. This aircraft is not safe for flight." "How long?" Rodriguez asked sharply. "2 hours minimum," she said. "If I'm going to test every system properly—" "Negative," Rodriguez cut her off. "We don't have 2 hours. Marines are dying right now." He turned to Marson. "Is this bird airworthy or not?" "Yes, sir," Marson replied without hesitation. "Airworthy. Santis is seeing problems that don't exist. She's been at this for weeks, imaginary issues, second-guessing every maintenance call. Honestly, sir, I think the pressure's getting to her." The words hit like a punch to the gut. She could feel her credibility slipping through her fingers. In Rodriguez's eyes, she saw it, the shift from considering her warning to writing her off entirely. "Sir, please," she tried again, "just give me 30 seconds to show you the evidence." "The evidence," Marson interrupted, "is that you've been wrong every single time. Remember the tail rotor crack that was just a shadow? The hydraulic leak that turned out to be condensation? You're a liability, Santis, dead weight that's going to get Marines killed with your delays." Rodriguez's decision came down like a judge's gavel. "We're launching with Bird 743 as primary. Santis, you're grounded, pending psychological evaluation." Maria's heart dropped as she saw the crew chief starting pre-flight on the backup. Black Hawk 743. She hadn't even touched that one yet. A sick realization formed in her gut. The saboteur hadn't just set up one aircraft. They'd engineered this moment, forcing her to ground the primary so the mission would take the backup. The trap was complete. "Wait," she yelled, sprinting towards 743. "You need to check the hydraulics on that one too." The rotors were already spinning. Her voice was swallowed by the roar. Marson's hand clamped around her arm, yanking her back. "Stand down, Santis. That's an order." Helpless, she could only watch as Black Hawk 743 lifted into the gray dawn, carrying 47 Marines toward what she knew was disaster. Its navigation lights winked against the mountain backdrop. For a heartbeat, she let herself believe maybe she'd been wrong. Then, at 2,000 feet, the helicopter shuddered. Even from the ground, she saw the nose pitch violently upward as the pilot fought for control. The failure hit instantly, hydraulics gone, exactly as she'd predicted. But on the wrong aircraft, 743 dropped fast, vanishing behind a ridge in a plume of dust and black smoke. The radio came alive, the voice urgent and cracking. "Mayday! Mayday! Bird 743 is down. 47 souls on board. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate CRR." Marson's face drained of color. Around them, the flight line erupted into organized chaos. Crew scrambled, orders barked. Maria didn't move. She stared at the smoke curling up from the mountainside, and the truth locked into place with cold certainty. This had been planned. Every step. The saboteur had banked on her reputation, knowing she'd ground the primary. They'd wanted 743 in the air, and had probably sabotaged both helicopters to ensure disaster no matter what. "Jesus Christ," Marson whispered, his earlier arrogance gone. "How did you know?" Maria turned toward him, her voice low and lethal. "Because someone here is trying to kill Marines, and they just did." She looked back toward the ridge, where 47 of their own were now trapped in hostile territory. The only question is, are you going to help me save them? Or keep calling me dead weight while they die? The rescue birds were hours away. The only shot was the grounded Black Hawk 742, the one she still might be able to save. Somewhere among the Marines gearing up for the rescue was the person who had set this all in motion. Maria forced her shaking hands to steady as she tore into 742's hydraulic system. Every turn of the wrench, every adjustment, life or death. The Black Hawk loomed in the maintenance hangar like some enormous, broken puzzle, a puzzle whose wrong answer would mean the deaths of 47 Marines trapped in the mountains while Taliban fighters closed in on them. From the cockpit, Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom, tight and clipped, each word straining under the pressure of the moment. "Hydraulic pressure's holding steady," he reported. Maria didn't miss the irony. The same man who'd dismissed her as dead weight barely 12 hours earlier was now watching her every movement as if his life depended on it, which in truth it did. "I'm getting intermittent warnings on the backup systems," he added. Maria swiped at the sweat running down her forehead, smearing a greasy streak of hydraulic fluid across her skin. She'd already found and fixed the sabotage to the primary hydraulic lines, a crude, obvious attempt to ground the bird. But something else was wrong. The backups were lighting up like they'd been tampered with too, and not in any amateur way. This was precise, deliberate work. Whoever had done it understood these systems inside out. "We're burning daylight," Captain Rodriguez snapped from behind her. He paced the narrow walkway of the hangar floor like a caged predator, boots striking sharp against the concrete. "Taliban reinforcements are moving toward the crash site. If we don't launch in the next 30 minutes, then we'll crash too," Maria cut in without looking up. Her tools clicked and clinked as she worked. "This isn't random. Whoever did this wanted it to look like a simple mechanical failure. They hit the primary hydraulics, the backup systems, and probably the emergency manual controls." Her hands froze mid-motion. A cold, sinking realization spread through her chest. This level of sabotage wasn't just skill, it was mastery. Someone with training equal to hers, or higher. She straightened and turned to Rodriguez, her voice low. "Sir, I need to know, who else in this unit has advanced hydraulic certification?" Rodriguez pulled a small roster from his pocket and scanned it. "You, Morrison, Staff Sergeant Williams, and Corporal Davis." Weetah. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. Only 4 people had the expertise to pull this off, and she was one of them. The other 3 were already prepping to board the very helicopter she was repairing. "One of them's a traitor," she said carefully, "and they're going to try to stop us from reaching that crash site." 20 minutes later, they were in the air. 5 crew members strapped in for a mission that was suddenly far more dangerous than any of them realized. Maria piloted, Morrison took the co-pilot seat, Williams and Davis manned the crew chief positions, and Corporal Jackson sat ready as medic. The aircraft responded sluggishly to her touch. The hydraulics were working again, but not at full strength. She'd squeezed every last minute she could in repairs, but the unease gnawed at her. Something still wasn't right. 15 minutes out from the crash site, it happened. The collective control grew suddenly heavy under her hands, demanding every ounce of strength just to hold altitude. Her eyes darted across the instrument panel. "Hydraulic pressure's dropping in the primary," she called over the intercom. "On it," Williams said, moving aft to check the lines. Davis stayed at his position near the door gun until Maria, watching from the corner of her eye, saw him shift. He reached for an access panel that housed electrical systems. "Davis, what are you doing?" Morrison's tone was sharp now, suspicion creeping in. "Checking electrical connections," Davis replied smoothly. "Hydraulic pumps are driven electrically, could be a power issue." But Maria had been around him long enough to know the truth. The way he positioned his body, subtly blocking their view, wasn't troubleshooting. It was concealment. The precision of his movements wasn't diagnosis. It was sabotage. "Morrison, take the controls," she barked, already unbuckling her harness. "What? Maria, we're in hostile airspace." "Take the damn controls." She was already moving, scrambling down the narrow cabin toward him as the helicopter shuddered under Morrison's grip. Davis saw her coming. His hand darted toward his sidearm, but Maria was faster. Years of combat reflex took over. She slammed into him, driving both of them into the metal cabin wall. The Black Hawk lurched, balance disrupted by their struggle. "He's the saboteur!" she shouted over the deafening roar of the rotors, grappling as he tried to draw his weapon. "He's been sabotaging the birds." Williams lunged to help, but Davis wrenched free, pistol flashing in his hand. "Stay back! All of you, stay back!" His eyes were wild, the truth written all over his face. "Why?" Morrison demanded from the cockpit, still wrestling the bird into the air. "Why would you kill your own Marines?" Davis's laugh was jagged and bitter. "You think this is about ideology? About the Taliban?" He kept the gun on Maria while reaching into his cargo pocket. "It's about money. 50 grand for every bird that goes down. The Taliban pay well for intel, flight schedules, maintenance gaps, crew assignments." Maria's stomach turned. Not a fanatic, not a zealot, just a man who'd sold his soul for cash. "How many Marines have you killed?" she asked, voice raw. "The 3 birds that went down last month? Not accidents. The supply helo in February? Same deal. Been feeding them intel for 8 months." He pulled a small black device from his pocket, a remote detonator. "I've planted charges on this bird too. Insurance policy. We'll all die in a tragic mechanical failure, and the Taliban will finish the rest at the crash site." The Black Hawk was dropping fast now, the sabotaged hydraulics giving their last breath. Through the windshield, Maria could see the scattered wreckage of 743 below, the sharp pops of gunfire flashing from the rocks, where survivors were still holding off Taliban forces. "You're insane," Williams breathed. "You'll kill yourself too," Jackson added. Davis shrugged. "Better than prison, or what they do to traitors." Maria's mind calculated distances, timing, angles. One chance. If he hit that trigger, they were all gone. The rescue crew, the Marines below, and any hope of exposing the network that had been killing them for months. "The money's not worth it, Davis," she said carefully, inching closer. "Whatever they're paying." "Shut up." His finger tightened over the trigger. His voice was full of venom. "You ruined everything with your paranoid inspections." Maria didn't wait to think. She lunged forward just as Davis's thumb hit the detonator. The blast slammed through the Black Hawk with a shuddering roar, less than he had planned, but still bad. By sheer accident, some of her earlier field repairs had interfered with his sabotage. Instead of obliterating the entire helicopter in midair, the explosives shredded the tail rotor, instantly throwing them into a vicious spin. She fought the lurch of gravity, her hands scrabbling for the device. In the chaos, she tore the detonator out of Davis's grip, fingers aching from the effort. The bird corkscrewed toward the ground, Morrison wrestling the bucking controls to keep them from becoming a smoldering crater. Below, the earth spun in dizzying fragments, sand, rock, and movement. Maria's stomach knotted as she caught sight of the Taliban waiting below, weapons ready, eager to finish off whoever survived the fall. 30 seconds. That was all they had before impact. 30 seconds, and 47 Marines were trapped in this crippled bird with a traitor strapped in among them. The crash came like a punch to the spine. The Black Hawk slammed into the rocky valley floor with bone-cracking force. The tail rotor, already crippled, ripped itself apart on impact, metal shrieking before disintegrating. They hit barely 50 meters from the twisted wreck of another downed bird. 743. Her vision swam. Her forehead smacked the instrument panel hard enough to make the world tilt sideways. Warm blood slid down past her temple, dripping across a windscreen crazed with cracks. Through the spiderwebbed glass, bursts of orange muzzle flashes lit the ridgelines. At least 30 Taliban fighters surrounded the valley. She forced herself to scan the cockpit. Morrison's voice came through, strained but steady. He was alive, his co-pilot's seat having taken most of the blow. His left arm hung uselessly, shoulder likely dislocated, but he could still move. From the cabin came a low groan. Williams, battered but breathing. Davis lay slumped, unconscious, wrists zip-tied by the crew chief during the descent. At least the traitor was out of the fight for now. Her head pounded, nausea threatening to pull her under. 2 birds down, 94 Marines stuck in a valley ringed with guns. Taliban reinforcements arriving by the hour. 2 hours, at best, before they were completely overrun. Maria shoved the dizziness aside and staggered out of the cockpit. Her boots crunched over gravel and debris toward the wreck of 743. She heard voices, faint, pained, calling for help. That chopper had come apart on impact, its main cabin smashed nearly flat. The tail section, though, had held together. Inside, she found 38 Marines alive. The pilot was conscious, though both legs were pinned under a snarl of twisted aluminum. "Santos," she breathed. He blinked up at her, voice raw with disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Fixing your ride home," she shot back, already scanning the wreck with a mechanic's eye. The main rotor was gone, obliterated. Transmission case split open. Cockpit a total loss. But the tail rotor, pristine. Engine casing, no visible damage. Even better, the hydraulic reservoir was intact. Morrison appeared at her side, cradling his injured arm. "Maria, this bird's done. There's no way." "There's always a way," she cut him off, mind spinning faster than the ruined rotors. "We're going to build one helicopter out of two." It was madness, cannibalizing the wrecks to stitch together a single flight-worthy machine. They'd need to transplant the tail rotor from 743 onto their own battered bird, reroute hydraulics and rig flight controls to manage an absurdly overloaded craft. 94 people, one lift. "That's not possible," William said flatly when he joined them. "It will be," Maria said, her voice suddenly sharp with command. "Yeah, strip every ounce of weight we can spare. Seats, armor, ammo, personal gear. We're not building a gunship, we're building a flying bus." Enemy sniper rounds cracked overhead, snapping against rock. The Marines worked in the shadows of the wreck, some standing guard while others tore into the carcasses of both helicopters under Maria's direction. Morrison, despite the pain etched on his face, became her right hand, keeping the work organized, yelling orders when she didn't have the breath to. The tail rotor was the worst of it. Over 200 pounds of delicate, unforgiving engineering, it had to be aligned with absolute precision or it would shake itself to pieces in flight. They had nothing close to proper tools, just whatever they could scavenge from the wreckage. Sweat streaked with grease and blood ran down Maria's face as she guided the team through the transplant. Hydraulic systems held barely, Sergeant Kim reported, surprising her with a knack for reading her technical shorthand. But the controls were all wrong. The stick's movements didn't match the rotor's response. She stepped back, eyes raking over the Frankenstein machine they'd created. It was ugly, parts that had never been meant to touch, bolted together, mismatched metals, jury-rigged brackets, and weight distribution so skewed it could flip them in seconds. "No autopilot, no stability system," she said. "We fly her by hand. Old school, stick and rudder." "Maria," Morrison warned, low. "Even if we get her airborne, she's going to handle like a brick. 94 people aboard, one slip, and we're all dead." She met his eyes, then looked around at the Marines. Kids barely old enough to shave, grizzled sergeants with families waiting stateside. All of them were staring at her now, hope and fear tangled in their faces. "Then I won't make a mistake," she said. They bolted the last panel in place just as the assault began. RPGs hammered the valley, enemy fighters closing in from three sides. The Marines held the perimeter, but ammo was running low and the numbers were against them. "We need to move. Now, Rodriguez yelled over the gunfire. "Mortars are coming up." Maria clambered into the pilot's seat, the controls alien under her hands. She could feel every flaw in the patchwork systems, every hesitation in the linkages, every vibration in the frame. The engine spooled up with a high-pitched whine that didn't inspire confidence. Through the cracked glass, Taliban fighters were less than 100 meters away. "All aboard," Morrison shouted. "Wounded first, then the smallest Marines, then everyone else." It took precious minutes to cram 94 human bodies into a space built for 20. Some clung to external rails, others were wedged shoulder to shoulder inside, packed like crates in a cargo hold. The landing gear groaned under the load, struts bending to their limits. Maria eased the collective up. For a sickening moment, nothing happened. The engine screamed, the frame shuddered, and the overloaded bird clung stubbornly to the earth. Then, inch by inch, impossibly, the Frankenstein helicopter began to rise. It flew like nothing Maria had ever known, sluggish, unstable, every motion resisting her. The controls felt heavy, uncooperative, as though the machine itself doubted it could stay aloft. She had to anticipate every adjustment seconds ahead of time, reading the aircraft's moods before it acted. Even the smallest ripple of turbulence threatened to rip apart the makeshift modifications holding the hybrid helicopter together. 500 feet above the ground, the tail rotor began to shake, no, convulse, sending violent vibrations through the frame. The entire craft trembled, a beast trying to shake itself apart in midair. Maria felt it in her bones, in her teeth, in the desperate grip of her fingers on the cyclic. Bolts were loosening one by one under stresses they'd never been designed to bear. She could tell, instinctively, as only a pilot could, that she had maybe 5 minutes before the whole machine tore itself to pieces. She keyed the radio. "Base, this is Santos," her voice steady but clipped. "Emergency approach. 9-4 souls on board. We're coming in hot and heavy." The descent into Fob Coast wasn't a landing. It was a barely controlled crash. She pushed the helicopter beyond safety limits, forcing the rotors to hold RPM, even if it meant sacrificing the landing gear. Sparks erupted as the belly scraped the runway, metal screaming in protest. Debris flew in jagged bursts as the helicopter slid more than 200 meters, skidding like a dying animal before finally, mercifully coming to rest. The hybrid systems gave out entirely the moment they stopped. But they were down. All 94 Marines were alive. Medical teams swarmed the wreckage in a flurry of shouts and motion. Maria remained in the pilot's seat for a moment, her hands trembling from the flood of adrenaline and sheer exhaustion. Then she saw him, Morrison, at her window. His arm was bound in a makeshift sling, his uniform streaked with grime and sweat. But there was something in his eyes she had never seen there before. Respect. "Santos," he said quietly, almost awkwardly, "I owe you an apology." "We all do." The investigation that followed tore open the truth of Davis's betrayal. His intelligence leaks had led directly to the deaths of 43 Marines over the past 8 months. The scale of the treachery placed him among the most destructive traitors in recent military memory. The evidence Maria had painstakingly collected became the key to dismantling the entire network. 6 weeks later, Maria stood ramrod straight at attention as General Morrison, no relation to Jake, pinned the Medal of Honor to her dress blues. The citation spoke in crisp, formal language. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life, above and beyond the call of duty." But the real moment came afterward. At the reception, Jake Morrison approached her. His arm was still in a sling, but the tension in his face had been replaced with something else. Openness. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about seeing problems others miss. I want to learn how to do that." Maria's lips curved into a small smile. She remembered every step of her own journey, from being dismissed as dead weight to standing here as a decorated Marine. "It starts with listening," and she told him, "really listening. Especially when you don't want to hear what someone's telling you." 3 months later, she was promoted to gunnery sergeant and tasked with developing new training protocols for mixed-gender aviation units. Her very first class included Jake Morrison, who had personally requested the transfer to study advanced troubleshooting techniques under her. On the wall of her new office hung a framed photograph of that impossible hybrid helicopter. The very machine that had, against all odds, saved 94 lives. It was a mechanical contradiction, a patchwork miracle that had survived through determination, skill, and the stubborn refusal to believe some problems couldn't be solved. Once they had called her dead weight, now they called her a hero. But Maria knew the truth was simpler. She was a Marine who had learned that the most dangerous enemy wasn't always the one pointing a weapon at you. Sometimes it was the person standing right beside you. And sometimes it was the voice in your own mind whispering you weren't good enough to make a difference. She had proven both of those voices wrong.